pupils, welcome. I'm Sharmida Kaushik, and if you're watching this, you are the learning kind. This is brought to you by Perpetual Pupil, experts at learning and development, currently focused on bringing new perspectives to education. Today on our podcast, we have a very exciting guest, Mr. Jagdish Chandra, who is a learning consultant and has over 2 decades of experience in the area. His journey in the field of education has been both explorative and expansive, navigating his way as a teacher, as a parent, and administrator too. So let's delve into his holistic insights into it today. Hi, first of all, how is it being interviewed by me?
Yeah, first time being interviewed by my own daughter. Let's see how it goes. I think there are two things here. Number one, I will have to expose my choices of education. And secondly, I will have to philosophize so that it doesn't become a small aspect of education journey that I have. So these two aspects. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what inspired you? I think the first question would be what inspired you to pick the field of education as a career choice?
I'm not very sure whether you can have a very clear and concrete answer because human choices are all about some kind of philosophical coincidence. Nobody, when I was in a grade 3 child, I didn't wake up one day and decide I'll be a teacher. My first choice was to be a conductor because I always saw that the conductor has a better cash bag. I thought all the cash that the conductor carries belongs to him. And, that time, the masculine image of being stereotyped actually made me believe that I should be a driver. Because driver appeared to be very masculine and somebody driving the whole vehicle and taking all of them, army officer, something like that. So the choice, rather than calling it a choice, I would call it as some kind of philosophical coincidence that it happened so. And somehow it appeared my personality is absolutely suitable to look at teaching and learning as an integral process of human performance itself. So rather than looking at what made me choose, I'm interested in seeing how integral any profession becomes when you start looking at it, not as a concrete thing to be operated on, but very abstract, something that's never ending. So I think it's a philosophical coincidence in one sense, but this philosophical coincidence has also led me to believe that it is not a very concrete choice, but very abstract. This abstractness is something that has helped me open up the teaching and learning process into a lot of other areas, into organizational development, people's performance, human relationships, human transformation, etc. So I think that would be a better answer rather than how I made a choice. Of course, I am a product of Regional Institute. And Regional Institute of Education had a very eclectic model of learning process. In fact, being a student of physics, chemistry, and mathematics, we were also made to learn about urban geography, ancient history, shorthand, and I have done carpentry and welding. So this eclectic process made me believe that education doesn't happen over what. It's something the word education, childhood, culture, all these not are terms. They are all tropes which carry multiple different meanings, and you keep on exploring those meanings as you grow, as you age further. Long answer for a short question, but that is how it will be.
Good, I'm glad. But I also know that the term learning consultant is new for many of us. You probably haven't heard of it. So, what are your roles and responsibilities? What are your contributions in individual growth and learning as you do right now? That it is an eternal process.
Right.
How do you choose when to contribute, what to contribute? What is the role?
Okay, why do I call myself a learning consultant? What it means to consult with other person in order to initiate learning or in order to cause learning. I think the term learning consultant is more of an invitation so that you can ask questions, that I can participate in the question and answering process. If I call myself a teacher, the number of questions will get limited. If I call myself a principal, again the number of questions will get limited. If I again call myself an educational consultant, these terms have its own karma and that limits itself. So I think a learning consultant, the term I use in order to have that as an invitation for others so that they can participate in a conversation. Having said that, I have contemplated about this term, and this term came upon when I was part of a business network group, and I was compelled to identify myself as somebody. I said, they asked me, I am into education. What kind of education? Training? I said, yes. Are you a soft skills trainer? No, no, no. I'm not a soft skills trainer. Are you personality developer? No, I didn't want to limit myself to all because learning is far more than all these terminologies, and I didn't want to limit that. That's number one. So what I mean by learning consultant is it's about recognizing the human need of moving from the point where the person is to the point where the person wants to be. Let us call this point as A, where I am. Do we really recognize where I am right now? It is not simple SWOT analysis. It is not a kind of exercise that you find in Johari window kind of exercise. It's a deeply contemplative exercise. It's a very self-empowering exercise because nothing is as empowering as self-awareness is. So to become aware of my A, my current position, and where I want to be, that is point B, moving from A to B, to make it as efficient as possible, to make it as effortless as possible, to make it as non-violent as possible, requires a consultant who helps you move and transit from point A to point B. So it's an extremely, I believe that, learning is something that's very critical in moving from point A to B, not just in recognizing these 2 points, but also in making as less violent as possible. Because any human action involves some kind of violence, collateral violence. Intelligence is about minimizing this violence. And how to minimize this violence, how to cause this transition as effortless as possible, as joyously as possible. I think that's the role I play as a learning consultant. Just to add one more point, as a learning consultant, I have two things. One is human beings learn and organization. Help the whole organization learn. I help the human beings learn.
You spoke about the organization as a whole. It moves as a community. Do you think maybe schools also having any to get beyond the administrative ease of the fact, defining roles as a teacher, principal, so and so actually limits the number of questions you can ask them?
It is true. Transactionally, you may have to call yourself by particular terminology so that others can understand. But at least internally, we should know what my role is. I think these 3 things are very important, whether you are a teacher or a principal or any role that you play within an education setup. Number one is what is your motivation? Second is what is your intention? What is your purpose? You don't have easy answers for all these things. You may come out with rhetorical responses about it, but you don't have easy answers for any of those. You need lot of self-reflection, and reflection itself is a very complex exercise. Reflection is not about recalling. I think many of you would understand. Reflection is not just about recalling. Reflection is a far more complex mechanism, and it involves looking into what I really want to do. So I think when you really understand what motivates me, what my intentions are, what my purpose is, you no longer want to lock up yourself in a particular terminology as a teacher or a student, something like that. In fact, Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of Oppress calls teachers as a different terminology uses. I don't remember the terminology. This terminology like the teacher learner. He uses the word teacher learner. And it is not possible for us to simplify these terminologies to a specific role. By doing that, we reduce those roles into systemic roles that we always play, like somebody who finished the syllabus, somebody who corrects copies. So there is an element of stereotypicality associated with all this terminology. It is important that teachers, principals, and educational administrators constantly strive to come out of this stereotypical systemic imagery that binds them. So it is very important that all these terminologies can be used transactionally, but we need to know how to transcend them as teachers. As teachers, fundamentally, we are all into teaching, and the only thing I have ever done in my life, in my career, is to be involved in the teaching and learning process. Nothing else.
And the teacher learns too, therefore.
That's what Paulo Freire uses that term in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But I would rather use the term a learning consultant. Somebody who initiates, I consult a human being in the learning process. I help, I am a catalyst. It involves a whole lot of facilitation process that goes into learning. So I call myself that.
Would you say then that the role could be that requirement for a guru in order for knowledge to flow, for it to pass on practicality.
But again, this terminology itself will have to be expanded. The word guru, I think I will have two takes on this. Number one, the word guru, if you actually look into the philosophy of Indian thought, you can look at it as Adhyapaka, Adhyaya, Pradhyapaka, Acharya, Guru.
Okay.
So I may call myself somebody who is at the level of Acharya. I'm interested deeply in providing insights to people so that they can perform whatever they want. Who is somebody who is absolutely somebody who presents you with courage. Courage is an extraordinary thing. And I'm not a guru provides you an absolute courage to go ahead and do what you believe in. Similarly, Upadhyaya, the first layer, is about somebody who informs you where is Taj Mahal located. Second point is somebody who gives you a context of knowledge. Context, the historical context of it, the spatio-temporal context of anything that has happened. And the third level, somebody who provides you skills of knowing something. Maybe how to study a dictionary, maybe how to go through an encyclopedia, maybe how to edit the information that you get from Google. So you have information, you have context, you have skills, you have insight, you have abhaya, absolute courageousness. Guru gives courageousness. So I would look at it as at least teachers should operate somewhere between pradhyapaka, somebody who trains people in skills so that you are independent, or acharya. Gurudom is a totally different thing. So that's take number one. Second T is in the modern understanding of sociology of education, we use two terms: Susangati culture and Guru culture. Susangati culture is one where, okay, let me talk about Guru culture. That is in the sociology of education. Padma Sarangapani uses it quite well. Guru culture is one where there is hierarchy. There is a privileged position to the knowledgeable person. Knowledge is objective and knowledge is well defined. As opposed to that, Susangati culture, knowledge is subjective. There is a recognition of the knowledgeable person, but there is no privileged position to the knowledgeable person. And learning is collaborative. Learning is co-constructed. Learning is community-based. So these two cultures are there. So when we use the word guru, but these two, one is, can I make somebody feel absolutely fearless so that the person can explore whatever the person has to explore? I'm not at that position, very sure. Second is, we have to look at it as Guru culture and Susangati culture. The modern Guru requires to create a Susangati culture. I'm not talking about the Rishi Samskriti tradition or knowledge tradition. I'm using it in that sociology of education terms. Modern Guru will have to construct Susangati culture classroom. A classroom where subjectivity matters more than objectivity. So this is what I mean by problem.
So I was asking you about other CEO, and in that you have explained a big chunk of what you were telling, like cultures that you
The Buddha Seed is a product of my free time during COVID. And it also has some kind of background in the kind of spiritual explorations I have had opportunities to look into. So in order to beat the lethargy during COVID, one of the finest options I had was write a book. And somehow Buddha, CEO, appeared the right one. Let me tell you what I saw in Buddha. That I started looking at this book and titled it as Buddha the CEO. One of the narratives that we have in Indian philosophy, I don't know where it has originated, but we have this philosophy called as Dashavatara. Dashavatara begins from Matsyavatara, that is the fish, and it keeps on graduating from one level of complexity to the other and ultimately reaches the avatar of Buddha. Now, let me not get into all the other details, but let me directly get into the aspect of Vamana. Vamana Avatara represents a shortened form of existence. Means, can you really run any organization any enterprise or any business without a prototype. Prototype is a very, very critical component of anything that you want, the model that you have. It's like an architect who brings a model in front of you so that it becomes visible to you, and then that is developed into a macro structure. Similarly, a prototype is a very critical component of any business. So that is Vamana Avatara. Once that is done, even when you have got the prototype, you have got the idea, you are still in ambiguity. A question of ambiguity is something that all business owners, any human being will have to cross over in order to reach excellence. And that reaching of excellence is ambiguity, is Narsimha Avatara. Is Narsimha a man, a beast, or God? It is in total ambiguity, and the total ambiguity is required in that Narsimha energy is required in order to cross over. You have to cross ambiguity. You can't expect finest things to happen without crossing over this ambiguity. Otherwise, we'll do only drinking of water kind of basic mundane activities of life. Once you cross over that, you require extraordinary discipline. Parashurama Avatar. He disciplined the entire world, it seems, according to the legend, that he went on killing all the Kshatriyas who felt that the land, the kingdom I have is my property. It is not your property, boss. You are in charge of that. You are a trustee of that. So moment you see, moment you feel that you own something, that is where you block all creativity. Creative processes stop. Once you cross over that Parashurama stage, you have Rama, idealism. Once you cross idealism, then you find the playfulness. Once you find the playfulness of Krishna, anything that has crossed Krishna's playfulness is, you reach Buddhahood, which is about auto creation. You are the business or your life or the organization that you are running is on its own. A teacher, for instance, is fantastic if the teacher is able to get into the class, create an energy there, and withdraws. To be able to put everything in auto mode is the ultimate aim of human life. So Buddha represents that kind of maturity. So how does a CEO, even a teacher is a CEO, everybody is a CEO. How does a CEO perform so that the CEO can create that kind of auto regeneration? It is like somebody like Narayana Murthy creates one of the finest organizations, and that fine organization is such a beautiful organization that he can replicate the same model in other areas also. That is why Narayana Murthy is invited to be chairman of something, Nandan Nilekani is invited to be a chairman of something. Unless you have undergone the entire process, you cannot recreate. So even in teaching and learning process, if you have not undergone the entire process, you cannot recreate. That is why it is said Vivian Richards could never be a good coach because he had that natural talent. Vivian Richards, probably Sachin Tendulkar also may not be a great coach. Sorry, Sachin Tendulkar, but he may not be a great coach. Kapil Dev, for instance, may not be a great coach because his talent is so natural that
They don't know the struggle.
yeah, he wouldn't understand. He will get irritated with somebody who doesn't get so easy. I have experienced that as a teacher. I will get irritated if you don't get this quadratic equation so easy. I'll get irritated with that.
Who better to know than me?
All you. That is why you have undergone the entire process, and it's very difficult to beat that momentum of mutation. And you can beat that momentum of mutation, of restlessness, frustration that human beings carry with them only through this process of transition from one layer to another. So that is what I try to bring in Buddha the seed. But there I try to touch upon human performance itself. Teaching and learning is all about human performance. And human performance is not about one area. Every area matters. Every area matters. The way the world occurs to me is the way I perform. If the world occurs to me as very dangerous, then I withdraw. If the world occurs to me as a playfield, I perform that. How can we, as leaders, make that happen?
So you spoke about how people must go through every layer of an organization. Would you say that in the case of good administrators are those who come from the foreground?
Not just, of course, you need to have ground reality. You need to have the entire spectrum. You need to have an understanding of the entire story in order to fit into any part of it. It's like Kamala Hassan's Chachi portrait. I have read an anecdote which Ompiri has written. There was absolute chaos. And Kamal Hassan came, and this chaos suddenly resulted in something like Chachi portrayed in the movie. It's a beautiful movie. Now, I remember yesterday I was listening to some talk. Govardhana was lifted by Krishna, and that represents some of the finest things of human life. When there is chaos all around, it requires Atma Bala. It requires your perception of the self as very powerful in order to come out of it, right? You can help the entire organization or an individual come out of chaos. The entire story. This story is slow. It is like a grandmother who tells the grandchild who has failed in the 9th standard examination that it's okay. To say that it's absolutely okay creates an extraordinary lateral imagination. And when everything appears stuck, this opening of lateral openings will create extraordinary breakthroughs. And that critical breakthroughs will not become possible to somebody who has not gone through the entire process. You become impatient. You become frustrated. And frustration, impatience, anxiety immediately reduces the profound possibilities that exist in human beings. So that is very, very critical that they know the entire story. How it happens, how the real growth of human being happens. That is very. Secondly, you need to be very participative. I believe that is why, as a learning consultant doesn't mobilize people, takes a workshop, forget. A learning consultant participates and participates in the chaotic environment itself. I participate in the classroom so that the learner, that is the teacher who is being trained, is able to observe how vulnerable even the trainer is. In the presence of vulnerability, where everything is vulnerable, in a state of uncertainty, everybody becomes courageous. And that exposure to that kind of courage is a very, very critical component. Of course, all these things I'm saying are romantic, but implementation requires a lot of discipline, a lot of cleanup of my own act, and authenticity to acknowledge that I haven't been absolutely great in all these aspects. So I think these are some of the aspects that are very critical in any leader or any teacher, somebody who can know the entire story. Very critical.
I'm a student, I've enrolled in school, and this is what you're supposed to do. What is that?
Is it okay if I answer that quite philosophically?
Yeah.
Philosophically, you should all be aware that it's a philosophical answer, and you have to use your discretion while taking it. I think real learning, everybody is entitled to learn. And learning happens when you drop all your entitlements. All entitlements, the political rightness that we are all stuck in, is a terrible obstruction, terrible barrier to learning, to experience life the way it is. So, we all should be able to drop those entitlements, drop those defenses, drop those justifications in order to be able to learn. So, that is why one thing that every learner is entitled to is that learning is not my responsibility. Learning is something that happens because of the community presence. So, as you understand, when we were leading Satpura Valley Public School, one of the pillars, you are a student of Satpura Valley
Yes.
Public School. One of the pillars I had is community learning initiative. It is not just the child who learns, but the entire community learns. Parents learn, teachers learn, principal learn, the entire community learns. How should we manage traffic? How can we participate in that? That is why I like this IE program. I don't know how it is implemented. Creativity, action, service, all these things are very critical components. So I think if at all I have to answer this, I would say every child is entitled to this feeling of community as a learning enterprise. And a community is a learning enterprise. Otherwise, community becomes a manufactured entity that is a product of some kind of mechanical engineering ego. As if you can solve all the problems by bringing some engineering. You can solve the problem of depression by some kind of Newtonian mechanical framework. So I think every human being, not just the learner in a institution, but every individual in this world is entitled and a community which is into learning, which is not stuck to any position. So I think that is what learners are intended. I think this kind of philosophical answers are much more useful because it opens up possibilities.
I agree, and it is very interesting to me specifically because I did go through schools that had teachers that would like the spark and withdraw, and the learning. We would naturally arrive at all the issues that thought either way suited
Correct.
on our own. So I know the relevance of it, but you actually were able to implement that in schools which had a much larger community. We operate in this specific podcast. I've kind of naturally been using the term the whole learning ecosystem around it. Ecosystem may involve parents, involve students, the teachers, including the staff and the janitorial staff that are there part of the community, are part of the ecosystem and they contribute. I want to ask, how would you practically give a suggestion to schools that have such a large ecosystem, such a large group of students to implement a more philosophical method of learning, much more like you did in SPS, Pura Valley, much more like I did in Purna Learning.
Yeah.
How would you suggest it? What steps would you suggest them?
You don't have steps, but I think it requires whole transformation of the philosophical attitude of the leader in the school, which is generally the principal. If I have to suggest, you look at any B.Ed course, any teacher education, it is framed about constructing some kind of teaching prop and some teaching aids, and they bring it into the classroom as if teachers cannot perform without those toys, teaching toys. That could be a critical component of learning. Please do that, please. But what is really required is a deliberate culture where everything is deliberated upon. In Satpura Valley Public School that I led were part of as a student, one of the policies that we had was approach of democracy. It doesn't mean that we don't have hierarchy, but an approach that is deliberative. Deliberative in the sense, human agency actually capable of bringing out solutions that are far more beneficial, far more holistic than the kind of solutions that the systemic approaches bring in. Now, when you have a deliberative approach, this deliberative approach is a very, very critical component. Solution-seeking modern world, we always seek solutions, right? Yeah. That is why we constantly classify students into slow learners, fast learners, geniuses, things like that. But actually, if you actually look into it, these terminologies are very narrow and they have their own baggage. So a deliberative process, which is about investigating the very semantics or the syntax in which our language is stuck. When you really have a deliberative process, you can move out of this semantic imprisonment. I'll give you an example. A person whom I call Guruji gives this example. You may have heard that some 10-year-old child may use an expression like, I'm fed up of life.
Yeah.
Right? When a 10-year-old child uses an expression like, I'm fed up of life, it has no meaning. Because the question is, boy,
where is it started?
You have to let your life up of your life. But the question is, where has this sentence come to the 10-year-old child? It has come as an imitation from the mother or somebody here, the child has heard from around. So the language that we produce is nothing but an average of the sum total of language that around us. And teachers, administrators, all human beings are stuck in this language of the average. It is almost like a conspiracy mediocre. And in order to break this mediocrity in our approach to it, means the mediocrity that we have in our approach to life, our own life. We are satisfied because things are working for me. I'm satisfied. No, I'm giving this almost like a partial right, but I'm also stuck in that. So bringing this awareness through a deliberation process is a very critical component of it. I don't think there is no other step. All the steps get generated when you create a real culture of deliberation in the institution, forget institution. Any organization is learning organization. You need to create the deliberation process. And to create the deliberation process requires a skill As Patanjali says, yoga karmasu kaushalam. It is like, okay, you got this ideal, but in order to achieve it, you need to move to it very skillfully. And that is where you require a learning curve.
What you are working right now, what are you working on currently?
Currently, we are looking at how the program, which we call as arts,
Humanities.
We no longer want to call it as art, but we want to call it as humanities. How to make humanities a cutting edge program. We have been very ambitious in making humanities program into one of the most sought after programs. I will tell you the reason for this. Without a liberal thinking or liberal imagination, I don't think we can come to solution to the problems that we are facing in the modern world. It requires liberal imagination. One example I can give you, probably we know that. Can Facebook be free from bias? Can Facebook be free from prejudice? Can artificial intelligence really generate solutions for us? This question cannot be answered easily. Now, when you really train a human mind in poetry, the kind of poetry, the way poetry should be taught, poetry doesn't subscribe to naive realism. You observe in poetry, the language is broken. For example, you look at A.K. Ramanujan's poem, I resemble everyone but myself. There is some kind of enchantment, there is a movement. Whereas, look at ordinary language that we use. Fox is an animal. Trump is a Republican. These are all declarative sentences which has no power of transformation. Whereas, by the very logic of poetry, it breaks language. By breaking that language, by breaking the very syntax, it becomes meaningful. So what humanities does is, humanities tries to break the very systems in which we are stuck. In fact, because we have lived our life, we don't even know that we have been conditioned to live the way we have been living. Yeah. Of course, we know it superficially, but at the core, we don't even know that we have been socialized to believe in certain things. I have been socialized, conditioned to think in particular ways. And without me freeing myself from that, I cannot make Facebook, I cannot make Twitter, I cannot make artificial intelligence free itself. And that is why you have this famous mythological images where there is a face of the human being and the body of a beast. You can never have the face of a beast, the brain of a beast, and the body of human. In the sense, technology or anything in this human world has to be led by a liberal, not vice versa. Once that happens, I think it's going to be a disaster because human behavior is very complex, and that kind of aspect we are trying to bring in by bringing in our intermediate program itself aspect of theory of knowledge. We are trying to look at phenomenological aspects of doing. We are trying to look at theory of knowledge. We are looking at ontology. How does a being actually operate? What is his being? And we are also trying to look at research literacy. Can we really authentically look at knowledge? And we are looking at self-management as an exercise. We are looking at digital badges where students collect digital badges even before they graduate into a program. So these are some of the things that we have been attempting to do, and it's a collective exercise. It's not an exercise that's going to stop in 1 year or 2 years. It's perpetual pupil.
So perpetual pupil speaking of. We are following that. I think all of you perpetual pupils, thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And until next time, don't stop learning.